My name is Millie, and I want you to understand something before I tell you this story. I am not a villain. I am not some cold-blooded, calculated monster who sits in a dark room plotting destruction. I am a 28-year-old woman who loved her family more than she loved herself for the better part of her entire life. I cooked for them. I covered for them. I showed up every single time, no questions asked, no favors expected. I was the glue, the fixer, the one who answered every 2:00 a.m. phone call without complaint. And on the night of March 14th at my brother Caleb's promotion party, in front of 73 people who had eaten food I helped pay for, my father grabbed me by my hair and dragged me across a marble floor like I was nothing, like I had always been nothing. So yeah, I made one call and by sunrise, everything they built was gone. Let me take you back so you understand exactly how we got here, because this story didn't start that night. This story started a long, long time ago. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. My father, Gerald, was the kind of man people called a self-made, legend to his face, and a tyrant behind his back. He built Holloway Construction from the ground up in the early 90s with nothing but 2 hands, a borrowed truck, and the kind of ruthless ambition that chews through people like their paper. By the time I was old enough to understand money, we were comfortable. By the time I was in high school, we were wealthy. And by the time I graduated college with a finance degree and a head full of ideas, Gerald Holloway had become the kind of man who forgot that other people existed as anything other than tools for his own advancement. My mother passed when I was 11, and after that, Gerald stopped pretending to be soft. Whatever warmth she had pulled out of him went straight into the ground with her. My brother, Caleb, 5 years older than me, became Gerald's golden boy almost immediately after the funeral. He was the heir, the one being groomed, the one who got the handshakes and the business dinners and the Sunday morning golf lessons. I got a list of tour and a reminder that girls don't run construction companies. I'm not even being dramatic. He literally said that to me. I was 14. For years, I told myself it was just his way, old school, rough around the edges. That's what everybody said about Gerald, and somehow that phrase was supposed to excuse every cold look, every dismissal, every time he talked over me at dinner like my voice was background noise. I built my own lane. I got into financial consulting, built a solid client base, networked hard, stayed sharp. I even started quietly helping with Holloway Construction's books on the side because their accountant was sloppy and I could see the errors from a mile away. Did Gerald thank me? No. He told Caleb I had done a good job right in front of me like I was the invisible hand that had just appeared out of nowhere to do his bidding. Caleb smirked. He always smirked. That smirk was his whole personality. Now, here is where it gets spicy, okay? Because I need you to understand what was happening behind the scenes before we get to the party. About 8 months before March 14th, I found something in the books that made my stomach drop, and honey, it wasn't a typo. Holloway Construction had been awarded 3 major city contracts over the previous 2 years. Big money, government money, and the numbers didn't add up. There were shell payments going out to a company called Ridgeline Development, LLC, that I had never heard of in amounts that were substantial enough to raise serious red flags. I dug deeper because that's what I do. I can't leave a loose thread alone. What I found was that Ridgeline Development, LLC was a ghost company registered in Delaware with no physical address, no employees, no actual projects. It existed entirely on paper. And the sole registered agent, a woman named Sandra Feltz, who happened to be Gerald's girlfriend of 3 years, a woman none of us were supposed to know about because Gerald kept that relationship so far underground. You'd need a shovel and a prayer to find it. My father was laundering money through city contracts and running it out through his secret girlfriend's shell company. That's what I found. That's what I sat with for weeks, going back and forth, losing sleep, second-guessing myself, telling myself I had to be wrong. But I wasn't wrong. I have a finance degree, 8 years of consulting experience, and an eye for numbers that doesn't quit. I was not wrong. I printed everything, organized it into a file so clean and clear that a first-year law student could follow it. And then, I did something that I still believe was the right move at the time. I went to Gerald. I sat down across from my father in his big leather chair, in his big wood-paneled office, and I laid it all out. I told him what I'd found. I told him it needed to stop. I told him the exposure was enormous and that if the city audited those contracts, everything would unravel fast. I wasn't threatening him. I was trying to protect the family. You know what Gerald said? He looked at me across that big mahogany desk, leaned back in his chair, and told me I was confused. He said I didn't understand how business worked. He said I should stay in my lane and stop playing detective with things that didn't concern me. Then, he told me very calmly, very slowly, like he was explaining something to a child, that if I breathed a word of this to anyone, he would make sure I never worked in the city again. His exact words were, "You forget who built this town, little girl." I walked out of that office shaking, not from fear, from rage, because I had come to him in good faith and he had threatened me, his own daughter. I went home, poured a glass of wine I didn't taste, sat on my kitchen floor, and cried for about 20 minutes. Then, I got up because I don't stay down long, and I put that file somewhere very safe and I waited. I don't know exactly what I was waiting for, maybe some sign that things would change, maybe some version of Gerald that would never come, but I waited. The promotion party was Caleb's idea. He'd been made regional VP at Holloway Construction, which was basically Gerald inventing a title to give his son more power and more of a cut without having to officially name him partner yet. It was a flex, a whole production. Gerald rented out the private event space at the Arcadia Club, the kind of place where everything is marble and gold-toned, and the wait staff looked like they went to the same elite hospitality school. 73 guests, catered, open bar, a jazz quartet in the corner. I helped plan it because of course I did. I ordered the floral arrangements. I confirmed the catering order. I picked up the custom cake because the bakery called my number by mistake and nobody else bothered to handle it. I showed up that night in a red dress that I knew was a moment. Hair done, heels on, ready to support my brother at an event I had partially organized and partially funded through a family expense account that Gerald would never acknowledge I had access to. Everything was fine for the first hour. Drinks, small talk, the usual crowd of business associates and family friends who all acted like the Holloways were American royalty. Caleb was in his element, working the room, doing the thing he does where he shakes hands and laughs loud and makes every man in the room feel like his best friend. Gerald was holding court near the bar, charming and polished the way he always was in public, nothing like the man behind closed doors. I was talking to one of our cousins near the appetizer table when I heard Gerald call my name from across the room, loud, cutting through the jazz and the conversation like a knife. I turned around and his face was different, tight, that look I knew from childhood, the one that meant something had shifted and the temperature in the room was about to drop. I walked over because what else do you do? He grabbed my arm and pulled me slightly aside, and through his teeth, smiling for the room, he told me he knew I had been making inquiries. Apparently, Sandra had flagged some activity, somebody checking into Ridgeline, some questions that had been traced back in a direction that led to me. I hadn't been sloppy, but I had made one call to the city procurement office weeks earlier, just verifying some contract numbers, and somehow that thread had gotten pulled. Gerald was not calm this time. His smile was on, but his eyes were somewhere between furious and dangerous. I told him, quietly, that I didn't know what he was talking about. That was the wrong answer, apparently, because what happened next happened so fast that my brain took about 3 full seconds to catch up to reality. He slapped me, open hand, hard enough that I stumbled sideways in my heels. The room didn't go silent all at once. It went silent in a wave, like a ripple moving outward from where we were standing, conversation dropping away table by table as people realized what they had just witnessed. My cheek was burning. My eyes were watering, not from crying, but from pure shock and the physical sting of it. And before I could even straighten up, before I could process what had just happened, Gerald grabbed a fistful of my hair near the roots, and he dragged me. He physically dragged me 2 steps toward the edge of the room like he was removing something that didn't belong. In front of 73 people in a red dress at a party I had helped plan. I heard glasses stop clinking. I heard the jazz quartet trail off. I heard someone gasp. And then I heard Caleb, my brother, the person I had covered for, driven home from parties, lent money to without documentation, defended in conversations he never knew about. I heard Caleb laugh. Not nervous laughter, genuine amusement, and he said it clearly enough that multiple people heard it. "You had it coming." I straightened up. I did not cry. I smoothed my dress with both hands, which were shaking, though I was trying very hard not to let them. I looked at my father. I looked at my brother. I picked up my clutch from where it had fallen near my feet, and I walked out. Every single step was deliberate. I was not going to run. I was not going to give them the satisfaction of seeing me fall apart in the Arcadia Club in front of 73 witnesses. I walked out through those glass doors and into the parking lot, and the night air hit me. And I sat down on a bench near the valet stand, and I took 3 deep breaths. My cheek was still hot. My scalp was sore. My hands were still shaking. And something in me, something that had been bending for 28 years, something that had been accommodating and forgiving, and telling itself that family is family and blood is blood, and you don't burn bridges you were born on, that thing snapped clean through, like a wire pulled one in too far. I took out my phone. I scrolled to a name I had saved 8 months ago and never used, a contact I had collected quietly during my research, the way you collect an umbrella and hope it never rains. Her name was Joel Ashworth. She was a federal investigator with the Financial Crimes Unit, and I had her personal cell because we had a mutual contact in the consulting world who trusted me enough to make the introduction when I first started sniffing around Ridgeline. I had never called her. I had always told myself I was protecting the family, protecting Gerald from himself, protecting the Holloway name. Sitting on that bench outside the Arcadia Club with a handprint on my face and the sound of my brother's laughter still living in my ears, I understood for the first time with total clarity that the Holloway name had never once protected me. I pressed call. She picked up on the second ring. I said, "Joel, it's Miley Holloway. I'm ready to talk and I have everything." She said, "I'll be at your place in an hour." I said, "Make it 45 minutes." I didn't go back inside. I went home, changed out of the red dress, made coffee, and pulled out the file I had kept in a fireproof lockbox under my bed for 8 months. Every page, every transfer record, every registration document for Ridgeline Development LLC. Screenshots of communications I had recovered through channels I will not detail here. A timeline I had built myself that was so thorough it had footnotes. Joel arrived at 11:47 p.m. with a colleague and a recorder, and that particular expression that investigators get when they can tell before they've even sat down that what they're about to see is going to be a real good night at work. We talked until 4:00 a.m. I walked her through everything. She asked sharp questions. I had sharp answers. At one point, she looked up from a page and said, "Miley, do you understand what this means?" I said, "Yeah, I understand exactly what it means." She nodded and went back to reading. Here's the thing about consequences that people don't fully appreciate until they watch them land. They don't arrive like a storm. They arrive like a bill, quiet, paper, delivered to the door at an unremarkable hour. At 6:15 a.m., while Gerald Holloway was presumably asleep in his house on Fairlawn Drive, still congratulating himself on whatever power move he thought he had pulled the night before, federal investigators executed a search warrant on the offices of Holloway Construction. They were also at Sandra Felt's condo. They had subpoenas for financial records going back 4 years. Caleb got a call at 6:48 a.m. from the company's panicked operations manager. I know this because that manager also called me out of reflex, because I was the one who actually answered phones in a crisis, and I let it go to voicemail. By 8:00 a.m., the story had been picked up by the local business journal's online feed. By 10:00 a.m., 2 of the city's major news outlets were running it. Holloway Construction's CEO under federal investigation for contract fraud. 3 decades of reputation, one headline. Gerald's lawyers were expensive and fast, but the evidence was airtight, and the cooperation I provided had given the investigation a running start that no legal team was going to slow jog around. The city immediately suspended all active contracts with Holloway Construction pending the outcome of the federal investigation, which meant the company's cash flow essentially stopped overnight. The bank that held their primary line of credit issued a freeze notice within 72 hours. 3 of their largest subcontractors, not wanting to get anywhere near the blast radius, pulled out of active projects. Caleb, who had no idea how deep it went because Gerald had kept him useful but deliberately ignorant, found himself holding the title of regional VP of a company that was being systematically assembled by people with federal badges and absolutely no interest in how many years he had been Gerald's golden boy. I want to be honest about something here, because I promised myself when I started telling this story that I would be real about all of it. There was no victory lap. I didn't sit at home watching the news coverage with a glass of champagne feeling like I'd won something. What I felt was quieter and stranger than that. I felt the specific exhaustion that comes after a long time of carrying something heavy and finally setting it down. I felt sad in the way you feel sad when you realize that the family you grieved for, the closeness you kept trying to manufacture, the version of your father who would one day see you clearly, none of that was ever going to happen. I had already lost them before March 14th. That night at the Arcadia Club just made it official. Burned the paperwork, so to speak. Gerald called me 11 days later. It was the first time he had contacted me since the party, and I almost didn't pick up, but something made me answer. He didn't yell. He didn't threaten. His voice was flat and tired in a way I had never heard from him before. That particular sound of a man who has had the architecture of his assumptions demolished. He said, "Was it worth it?" I thought about the question for a second, genuinely. Then I said, "You clapped, Caleb. You literally clapped." He didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he said, "I didn't know it would go that far." I said, "Neither did he when he raised his hand." And I hung up. I have not spoken to him since. Gerald's case is still moving through the federal system, the way these things do, slow and grinding and inevitable. Sandra Feltz cooperated early in exchange for a deal, which, honestly, I respect because she was smart enough to read the room. Gerald hired a defense team that costs more per hour than most people make in a month, and they have slowed things down the way expensive lawyers do, filing motions and continuances and technical arguments that buy time without buying freedom. But the evidence is what the evidence is. Numbers don't lie. Shell companies don't disappear just because you stop looking at them. The truth is patient in a way that people like Gerald Holloway never account for, because they spend so long controlling their environment that they forget control is not the same thing as safety. I rebuilt. That's the part people always want to know about, the after. And the after is, honestly, less dramatic, but maybe more important than any of it. I left the city for about 6 months, worked remotely from a rental in Asheville, got some distance, got some sleep, started running again, found a therapist who was sharp enough to skip the surface stuff and get to the actual roots quickly. I came back in the fall with a clearer head and a smaller, tighter client list of people I actually trusted. I don't do family favors anymore. I don't do off-the-books work for anyone. I charge my rate. I send my invoices. I keep my boundaries like they're load-bearing walls because I have learned in the most expensive possible way that they are. I tell this story not because I want sympathy, though I won't pretend the support I've gotten from people who heard about it didn't matter, because it did. I tell it because I spent almost 3 decades shrinking myself to fit inside a family that used my smallness as a convenience. I told myself that enduring was the same as loving, that staying was loyalty, that keeping the peace was worth the cost of my own dignity. I was wrong about every single one of those things. You cannot love people into seeing you. You cannot sacrifice your way into being valued. And the moment someone puts their hands on you in anger, in public, in front of an audience, and the people who were supposed to have your back instead start clapping, that is not a moment for more patience. That is a moment for one phone call. So here's what I need you to hear, and I mean this with every ounce of seriousness I have. Know your worth before someone tries to put a price on it. Know your receipts before you need them. And know that walking away is not losing. Sometimes, walking away quietly in a red dress with a full file in a lockbox and a federal investigator's number in your phone is the most powerful thing you will ever do. I'm Millie Holloway. I had it coming, and so did they. If this story moved you, share it. Someone out there might really need to hear it. If you enjoy intense stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. Your support truly means everything and helps keep these stories alive. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from around the world. I'd love to see how far this reaches. Let's build a strong global community together.